So Rich and I, my husband and I, Rich is here today. Rich, thanks for coming today. Rich and I have 4 kids. We have 3 boys and a little girl, and many of you know this. Our 3 boys are aged 20, 16, and 13. And little Audrey, who has Down syndrome, is age 6. So quite a span there. And they're all different. I mean, of course they are. They're all different. They're all unique. They have varied interests and likes and dislikes. Well, our middle son, and I do have permission to share this story, our middle son is into rowing, okay? Rowing, crew. Now, I've never Rich and I are not from rowing families. It seems like the kind of thing you do when you live around the water. But he rows, and he rows right over here on Lake Chabaco. And so rowers compete in regattas, I have discovered. You probably knew that. But they compete in regattas, and Sam has been in a number of regattas, including the head of the Charles. But last summer, he was in a regatta in Canada called the Royal Canadian Henley. Has anybody heard of it? Any rowers? Yeah, okay, we're all learning. All right. So he was in this regatta. It's a week long. But the difficulty was that Sam didn't tell me he was rowing in this regatta until 3 weeks before the race. Okay? Sam didn't have a passport. So I had to rush a passport for him, and then we had to figure out transportation for him because Rich and I, our schedules were such that we actually could not drive our son to this regatta. Remember, we've got 3 other kids and, jobs and parents, all kinds of things to take care of. And I thought, oh my gosh, my child is going to cross the border, to Canada for the first time, and I can't be the one to drive him. I wanted to drive him to cross the border. So he had to drive with another family whom we did not know. In fact, I still have not met them, but he's back, so everything worked out just fine. And if you've ever sent your child, maybe you haven't, maybe I shouldn't even mention this, but if you've ever sent your child to another country alone or with another family that you didn't know, you have to write all kinds of things and fill out forms. So, when they pass through border control, it doesn't look like they're kidnapping your child. So anyway, we filled out all the forms. It was this big thing. And Sam got to the regatta. Well, I really wanted to see him race. He was in 3 races, and the last race was going to be on Friday at the end of that week. At 3 p.m., he was racing a double, okay? So Rich and I worked out the schedules, and we said, I could get there. I was going to leave at the crack of dawn. It's a 9-hour drive to Ontario, St. Catharines, Ontario. So I left right before 5 a.m., and I was going to make it for Sam's 3 o'clock race. And I was, I-90 and the New York Turnpike. It was really pretty easy traveling. And then around noon, Sam called me while I was on the road. I was making good progress. I was going to make it for the race. And he said, hey, how's the travel going? I said, Sam, it's going great. It's going fine. I can't wait to see you. And he said, oh, yeah, I totally forgot to tell you. My race is at 1, not 3. Are you kidding me? And I said, okay, honey, no problem. I'll do my best, end. And I thought, I can make it for the 3 o'clock race, but not the 1 o'clock race. And he was not in a 3 o'clock race. So I, get to border control, get through all of that, and get to St. Catharines, and tell Sam I'm there. And he meets me. Rowers are often, they're tall. He's a big, tall kid. He meets me in the parking lot, and he comes up, and he says, Mom, thanks for coming. And he pulls me in, and he gives me a hug. He's done with his race. There are boats and trailers all over. Everybody's packing up. And thanks for coming. And I said, oh, no problem, Sam. It's a good ride. And I said, I have a hotel for us tonight. I couldn't get anything in this area because Well, there's a major regatta going on here, and most people booked months in advance. So I'm about 30 minutes south in Niagara, on the Canadian side in Niagara. I said, we can go back there, we can grab dinner, and look at the falls. We had never seen Niagara Falls. And he looked at me and he said, oh, Mom, he said, that sounds great, but we're having so much fun in the dorms with the guys. He said, we're gonna watch a movie tonight. I said, oh, yeah. No problem. No problem. I said, what movie? He said, Veggie Tales. Now, okay, Sam has seen every Veggie Tales movie 10,000 times. By the age of 5, he had seen them all. And I thought, oh yeah, I mean, that's just fun. But that's what teenagers do. They want to hang out with their friends. They want to watch Veggie Tales. I said, no problem. I said, have fun. I'll just drive back up north tomorrow morning and pick you up, and we'll head home tomorrow. Okay, see ya. That was that. I turned around, and I got in my car, and I headed to my hotel, which really was nothing special. I had to get something very last minute, sort of the looking over the parking lot, cheapest room you can get kind of thing. So I'm driving there, I arrive, and, well, this is a little aside, arrive, and the parking situation is messed up that day. So you had to park temporarily underneath the hotel. So, they had a garage way underneath this hotel, and, I've got the minivan, and you have to, navigate all those big pillars, and I did fine. I navigated them just fine. And I got there to the bottom, and when I got there, the attendant said, he gave me all these directions. He said, you got to pull in. Way at the back, there were these huge, there's 6 columns. He said, I want you to go to the end, and I want you to back in. And he said, when you back in, then you're going to give me your keys, you're going to get a ticket, and then then you have to take all of your luggage out, but you only have 15 minutes. He said, you're going to take elevator B up to floor 3, and then check in. Bring all your luggage in, but you have to be back here in 15 minutes, otherwise we'll tow you. I was like, what? And I said, okay. And I was just nervous about backing in, so I get there, and I do my best. I back in, and I roll down the window to another attendant, and I said, would you mind just, explaining that there were a lot of directions, just explaining again, what do I do next? And he looked at me. Without moving, staring at me, he yells, Frank, this lady needs help. I'm the lady that needs help. So I had to go see Frank. And he schooled me in the parking garage. So I saw Frank, and I did everything I needed to do, gave him the keys, got up to the floor, and, I'm sweating by this time, thinking the clock's running, and Frank's going to get mad. And I get there, I check in, and the clerk says, I'm there at 4 p.m. exactly, okay? That's check-in is at 4 p.m. This is Batten time. I'm never there at 4 p.m., all right? I'm there. And he says, I'm so sorry, ma'am. He says, your room is not ready. And I thought, it's no problem. No problem. And I must have looked weary, exhausted. I don't know what I look like. But he said, I can get you another room right now. I said, okay, let's do that. He said, do you mind the 20th floor? And I said, as long as the elevator's working and I can get there and back in 15 minutes. Because Frank is waiting for me downstairs. And so we get the key card, take the elevator up, tap the key card against the door, open the door. The entire back wall of this room is floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Niagara Falls. I just thought, Mama made out. But it took my breath away. It absolutely took my breath away. I had felt like that whole day had knocked the wind out of my sails. But I got to that room, to that vista, And it was just one of those moments of, have you ever had that? Have you ever had that happen? When you just pause for a moment because something just, it takes your breath away. When was the last time the majesty of God took your breath away? Maybe you were driving and you turned a corner and a vista popped out in front of you. It was mountains, majestic. It was a sunrise or a sunset, but whatever it was, for a moment you went, and you remembered God's might, His majesty, His beauty, His power, His awe. Maybe it's a day like today, and you see the snow falling softly, or just on Monday, the wind howling, and you stop and you pause and you think, God's majesty, His might, His magnificence, His grandeur, His power, His beauty, and you pause and you see it in a way that maybe you haven't in some time. Psalm 8 talks about the majesty of God. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. That's a refrain that we see at the beginning of the psalm, and of course then again at the end of the psalm. In the 1800s, Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote a poem called The Grandeur of God. And he describes the grandeur of God as an electrical charge that's constantly running, but you can't always see it. But sometimes, every once in a while, it flickers out like the shining of shook foil in the sun. And it catches you, and you look, and you pause, and it takes your breath away. He says, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil. Crushed, why do men then now not wreck his rod? Why do people not bow to his authority, wreck his rod? It's a symbol of his authority. Why don't they see it? Why don't we see his majesty? It's there. I remember when I was a student here in the Dark Ages, Haddon Robinson taught preaching, and he told the story about a lay person who came to him and said, I'm tired of boring sermons. And he said, if every preacher, before they got a church, went out and traveled and explored the world, they could come back with interesting stories and illustrations, and then their sermons wouldn't be so boring. Well, Haddon scratched his head, of course, and he wasn't against travel at all. He certainly was against boring sermons, I can tell you that. He was the one who said that more people have been bored out of the Christian faith rather than reasoned out of it. But he said, you know, some people can walk around the block and see all kinds of interesting things. Other people can travel the world and see very little. I wonder about you. Have you seen the majesty of God? Do you see it? It's his beauty, his might, his magnificence, his grandeur. Do you see God's majesty? The psalmist tells us that it's actually surprising who sees God's majesty and who responds in praise to the majesty of God. You have set your glory in the heavens. through the praise of children and infants. You have established a stronghold against your enemies through the praise of children and infants, through the lips of children and infants. You have ordained praise. It's something about children, infants, the dependent, the weak, the humble. Something about them, something about that stature, that posture that sees the majesty of God. You see, when we see God's majesty, we can't help but see something about ourselves. His grandeur, His might. We cannot help but see our own smallness. That we are small, and He is big, grand. Teddy Roosevelt, when he visited Sagamore Hill, he would often invite a friend, and one such friend was William Beebe, the naturalist. And William Beebe describes many of these visits, and he said they would have a conversation indoors, and at night they would head outside to the lawn. And they would look up at the sky to the left-hand corner of a bit of light, and Roosevelt would point out. And he would say, that is the spiral galaxy in Andromeda. It is as large as our Milky Way. It's one of 100 million galaxies. It has 100 billion suns, each larger than our own. And then he'd turn to his friend and he'd say, now I think we are small enough. There's something about seeing God's majesty, being able to see it when we know our own smallness, when we know our own need, our own dependence. When we see that, we can see God's majesty. But I wonder what it is that those who are weak in this world, those who are small in this world, humble in this world, dependent in this world, what happens as we age? Does something happen as we age? That we don't see God's majesty maybe the way we once did? Do we become more independent, less humble? I wonder if over the course of time, rather than calling out, "Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name," instead we begin to say things like, "How majestic is my name." Instead of looking outward or upward, we begin to look inward. And we focus on our own might, our own strength, our own beauty, the things that make us magnificent. And I wonder if we spend much of our time trying to convince others of our own majesty, our own might and beauty. How majestic is my name in all the earth. It's easy to fall into it. It's easy to fall into it even in a place like seminary. My research, my writing, speaking, publishing, grades, certificates, awards, diplomas, degrees, all of it. How majestic is my name? But the psalmist tells us it's from the lips of infants and children. Praise him. Those who are weak, dependent, humble, they see God's majesty and respond in praise. Our little daughter, Audrey, is 6 years old, but when she began preschool, she was just 3. And I remember at the end of that year, Miss Beth wrote us a note. Miss Beth was Audrey's sidekick, her one-on-one in the classroom. And Miss Beth wrote us this note, and she said, "Dear Rich and Pat, Audrey has learned so much this year in preschool, but I have learned more. Whether it's pausing to pick up a fallen leaf and look at it in wonder, or to grab off of the path a pebble and just take a moment to feel its smooth, cold texture. Whether it's to get out of line, just turn and hug the person next to her. I've learned so much from your little girl. What is it about the little, the humble, the weak that knows how to see God in all kinds of things? The psalmist tells us that from the lips of infants and children comes praise. But there's something even more interesting. Not only does the psalmist tell us who gives praise in response to God's majesty, the psalmist tells us what happens as a result of that praise. As a result of this praise, look at this. You have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. There's something about the praise or the witness of the weak, the humble, the dependent that can stop the enemy in his tracks. I mean, think about that. If you really think about that, it ought to take your breath away. I mean, to defeat an enemy, God could do anything. He can call out the best armies with the best training, the best weaponry. I mean, God can defeat an enemy using the best of the best technology. But he says that the enemy is defeated through the praise of the weak, the humble, the dependent, infants, children. Think about that for a moment. Should take your breath away. Now, of course, we're seminary students. We work here at a seminary. You don't have enemies. I imagine you know what it's like to do battle. Are there battles you're facing? How do you fight them? How do you fight those battles? The psalmist says, the posture of your heart sure does matter. You fight them in praise. Take our breath away. And there's something about that, about the weak giving praise to God in response to his majesty, that it points back to his majesty. There is something about that that demonstrates God's majesty and puts his majesty on display. God's majesty. It's seen in such curious ways, the way the weak give him praise. But there's more. The psalmist says, verse 3, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You've made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds, the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. Isn't it surprising how God demonstrates his majesty through vulnerable, dependent, and weak and humble people? Not only those who give him praise, but also when we care for his creation. This is what the psalmist is talking about here. He says it's unimaginable. It should take your breath away that he has crowned human beings with glory, kabod, weight. He has given us a glory, a weight, a holy responsibility to care for all that he has made. Think about that for a moment. Take your breath away. And when we do that well, when we do that to his glory, something about that demonstrates his majesty, not our majesty. Something about that points back to him, back to his might, his beauty, his power, his glory. When we do that well. But it's surprising, isn't it? I think again of our little daughter, Audrey. She helps Rich out in the yard. Every summer they do yard work together, and I have to tell you, every day they come back in the house, both of them soaking wet. And that's Audrey doing yard work. I would never send out a flyer to all the residents on our street or to the town of South Hamilton saying, Audrey, she'll come do your lawn. That makes no sense at all. I read this. I think, what is God doing? All of creation. He gives us this glory, this responsibility. He says, you care for it. You cultivate it. And when you do that well, points back to God's majesty. It's surprising, isn't it? How God uses the weak, the unlikely, the vulnerable to demonstrate his majesty in this world. Takes your breath away, doesn't it? Maybe some of you are still skeptical. Maybe your breath hasn't been taken away by God's majesty. What about this, then? The incarnation. A baby, small, vulnerable, weak, dependent. And as Tim Keller often preached in his sermons, grew up living the life that we should have lived and dying the death that we should have died. If that doesn't take your breath away, I don't know what will. It's surprising, isn't it? How God uses what is weak, humble, vulnerable to display his majesty in this world. I don't know what's on your mind today. I don't know how you came into this chapel this morning. Maybe you know what it's like to feel deflated. Maybe you know what it's like to have the wind knocked out of your sails because of something that has happened in your life or something that somebody has said, but you just feel deflated. And you sure could use a glimpse of God's majesty. I hope this psalm points you back to him. Or maybe you've come to this chapel today and you've been convicted that unintentionally you have been striving to receive your own majesty. And you have been striving to be the person that other people say, oh, he took my breath away. She takes my breath away. I hope that today this psalm points you back to the majesty of God and how surprising it is that God uses what is weak, dependent, humble to demonstrate his majesty in this world.